In our town, things don't change. Not really. Mornings still roll in slow over low fields and pine ridges. Fog settles in the hollows like it's got nowhere else to be. Cows lean against sagging fences, chewing like time doesn't exist. Goats climb whatever they shouldn't. Geese wander yards like they pay property tax. We call the place Black Creek now, though older maps say something else. Doesn't matter. It's 70 miles from the nearest real town, tucked into a shallow valley at the edge of the Montana timberline. No cell service unless you hike uphill and hold your phone toward the sky like a prayer. Winter never fully arrived that year. Instead, we got that in-between season, the kind where the ground isn't frozen solid and isn't mud either. It's a cold slurry, a gray-brown slush that grabs your boots and doesn't want to let go. Every step feels like the earth is reconsidering whether you deserve to move forward. I was standing by my well when I realized something was wrong. Not just wrong. Wrong in the way your stomach knows before your brain catches up. I couldn't take my eyes off the dark circle below. 10 minutes had passed, maybe more. No sound from inside, no voice, no shifting rope, nothing. The rope hung taut and rigid, disappearing into blackness like it had been swallowed whole. Yesterday, everything had frozen hard. Pipes across town cracked or slowed to trickles. Some houses lost water completely. So this morning, we came out to draw from the old well, the one my grandfather reinforced with timber decades ago. The bucket hit bottom too fast. Not a splash, a hollow knock, like hitting dry stone. We lowered it again. Same thing. No water. We thought maybe debris had fallen in. Maybe part of the lining collapsed. Then we realized the worst possibility. We tied a climbing rope with knots spaced every foot. My neighbor, Ben Carter, strong guy, hunts elk every fall, built like he could wrestle a bear and win, strapped on his headlamp and went down.
I held the rope at the top. At first he joked about the cold, said the timber walls were slick with ice. His voice echoed upward, steady and annoyed. Then he got quiet. Then he said something I haven't been able to forget. Walls caved in down here. There's a tunnel or something. Alex, you need to see this. And then he stopped talking. I called down. Ben? Nothing. Ben, answer me! Silence. The rope twitched once, barely, like something brushed it. Then it went still. I was standing there in thin sweatpants and a long winter coat that didn't block the wind nearly enough. The cold slid through the sleeves, under the collar, into my fingers until they ached. There's no quick help out here. No 911 that arrives in 10 minutes. Nearest emergency response is an hour and a half away if the roads are clear. And they weren't. My snowmobile was dead in the shed. The river is 10 miles through forest and half-frozen marshland. You don't just go get water. And without the well, this town doesn't function. Not for drinking, not for livestock, not for anything. I went back inside to dress properly. Not because I wasn't afraid, because I was. That's the kind of fear that makes you methodical. I pulled on insulated pants, thick wool socks, boots, 2 layers of gloves. Checked my flashlight, extra batteries. Grabbed an old carabiner to clip the rope to my belt in case I needed both hands. I slid a folding knife into my pocket, not because I thought I'd need it, because not having it felt worse. Outside, the air had changed. It smelled metallic, wet timber, damp soil. something deeper, like river mud dragged up from below. And there was something else. The snow. It wasn't white, not fully. The cement plant 40 miles east had opened last year. They promised filters, promised environmental controls, promised it wouldn't affect the valley. But we'd been getting dust ever since. Sometimes black soot, sometimes pale gray ash.
Today it was red. Fine brick-colored powder mixed into the snowfall, coating roofs and fields in a rust-colored sheen. Even footprints looked stained. The valley didn't look like winter. It looked like it had been dusted with dried blood. When I returned to the well, the rope still hung stiff and unmoving. I stepped close and peered down. Blackness. No beam of Ben's headlamp, no echo of movement. Just depth. And something else. A sound. Low. Not loud, but thick. Like someone breathing underwater. A heavy internal movement of air that didn't belong in a wooden shaft. It rose slowly, hit my chest, made it hard to swallow. For a split second, my mind betrayed me. I pictured Ben at the bottom, headlamp flickering, and something large shifting in the collapsed wall beside him. Something not meant to share space with daylight. I jerked back so fast I almost slipped. "Ben!" I shouted, forcing my voice steady. "You hear me?" No answer. The sound came again, closer. I felt it in my ribs. And in that moment, I knew something simple and humiliating. I did not want to go down there. My hands moved before my pride could stop them. I climbed down maybe 3 feet, just enough for the cold, wet wood to press against my shoulders, and the sound grew deeper, like air being drawn into lungs that hadn't breathed in a long time. I scrambled back up immediately, heart pounding so hard it blurred my vision. I leaned over the edge again and shouted until my throat burned. Nothing. Wind picked up across the yard, pushing red snow sideways. It clung to the well cap, to my sleeves, to the fence posts. The entire field beyond my house looked stained, as if something beneath the soil had seeped upward overnight. I wasn't going down alone. Not again. I pulled out my phone and tried calling Stephen Hale, the town handyman. He fixes pipes, motors, pumps, climbed wells before. Signal flickered in and out. Finally, it rang. "Yeah? Steve, it's Alex. Ben went down my well. There's a collapse. He's not answering." Silence on the other end. Then the call dropped. No bars, no service. The wind intensified, snow thickened, and when I turned back toward the well, someone was already standing there. It was Mrs. Whitaker from 2 houses over. Small woman, late 70s, headscarf tied under her chin, grocery tote hanging from one hand. She was leaning over the well, looking down, and she looked unsettled. "You shouldn't stare too long into it," she said without looking at me. I swallowed. "It's dry," I said. "Ben's down there." She shifted her weight and stepped back slowly. "The red snow always comes first," she murmured. I glanced toward the fields. The rust-colored dust stretched across the valley like a stain. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, and lowered her voice. "They used to say there was a woman thrown down that well, long before your grandfather lined it with timber." I didn't want folklore. I wanted my neighbor. But she continued anyway. "They thought she was a witch. Turns out she wasn't, just different. They broke her bones when she fell. They say she didn't die right away." The wind gusted hard enough to rattle the bucket hook. "And the men who climbed down to save her," she added quietly, "they never came back up." The well creaked. Not from wind, from below, and the rope shifted just slightly. The rope didn't jerk. It didn't snap tight like someone had grabbed it. It just moved. A slow, deliberate sway, like something brushed past it on the way down. Mrs. Whitaker saw it too. I know she did, because her fingers tightened on the edge of the timber ring, and she stepped back without another word. "You hear that?" I asked. She didn't answer.
Instead, she crossed herself, quick, practiced, and muttered, "Don't go chasing what's already claimed." Then she turned and walked into the red snow, like she hadn't just said something that would stick in my head for the rest of my life. I stood alone again. The wind pressed sideways across the yard, carrying that fine, brick-colored dust. It gathered in the grooves of the wood, settled into the cracks of the well cap, and turned everything faintly rust-red. The rope hung still now, like nothing had touched it, like nothing had ever been there. I told myself something simple. Collapse, bad air, panic. That's it. Wells can fill with carbon dioxide if groundwater shifts. Heavy gas settles low. A man climbs down, takes a breath, and drops. It happens. It's happened before. That's what I told myself. But that sound, that wasn't gas. I went to get help. First stop was Frank Dillard. Runs the only working tractor in town during winter. Big guy. Doesn't scare easy. I found him in his kitchen with a bottle open and the radio humming static in the background. "What's got you looking like that?" he asked. "Ben's down my well. Steve, too. Neither came back up." Frank didn't laugh, didn't dismiss it. He stared at me long enough to measure whether I was exaggerating. "You sure they didn't just climb out the other side of whatever hole they found?" he asked. "There is no other side," I said. "It's a well." He exhaled slowly and grabbed his coat. By the time we got back, 3 more people had gathered. Small-town gravity at work. News spreads fast when there's nothing else to do. Tommy Bell, Nate from the feed store, and Mrs. Whitaker again, though she kept her distance this time. Frank leaned over the well and shined his heavy-duty flashlight down. The beam cut through darkness for maybe 15 feet, then swallowed whole. "Water's back," he said. "What?" "It's rising." I stepped beside him. He was right. When I'd left earlier, the bucket had hit dry stone. Now I could hear it. Not splashing, but filling. A low, steady surge from below. The level was climbing fast, too fast, like someone had opened a floodgate underground. "Ben!" Frank shouted down. No answer. But something responded. A deep, hollow vibration rolled up the shaft. Not wind, not echo. Something else. Tommy stepped back first. "Man, I don't like that." Nobody did. The water climbed visibly now. Dark, murky, reflecting the faint red tint from above. If Ben and Steve were down there wouldn't be space left. Not for air, not for hope. Frank muttered a curse under his breath. "We call emergency," he said. "Now." I pulled out my phone again. 1 bar, then none. Tommy tried his. Nate tried his. We walked in circles like idiots, holding our phones up toward the sky, stepping onto truck beds, raising arms as if reception was something physical we could grab. Nothing stable enough. The snow thickened again, and with it, the red. It stuck to our sleeves, our collars, our eyelashes. When it melted, it left rusty streaks on skin. The whole valley looked infected. More townspeople gathered despite the weather. Kids started throwing red snow at each other like it was funny. Their parents yelled half-heartedly. The well continued filling.
The rope that had once led to open space now floated on the surface of dark water, drifting lazily in circles. Mrs. Whitaker leaned toward me without looking directly at the shaft. "When the water returns like that," she said quietly, "it means it's sealing." "Sealing what?" I snapped. She finally met my eyes. "The opening." I didn't have patience for that. Frank spat into the snow. "This ain't witches," he said flatly. "It's gas and groundwater. That's it." He sounded like he was convincing himself. By nightfall, the well was completely full. Black water nearly level with the timber rim.
And no sign of the men. The snowstorm worsened. Wind howled down from the ridgeline, bending the trees. The red tint intensified under porch lights, giving everything a sickly glow. Eventually, people left. You can only stand around a hole in the ground for so long before reality sets in. Without equipment, without air supply, without proper rescue. There was nothing we could do in that weather. Frank stayed longest. Then he shook his head. "If they're in that tunnel and it's tied to groundwater, they could be miles away by now." He didn't say dead. He didn't need to. That night, the storm knocked trees across the only road out. I tried driving toward the highway at first light and had to turn back. 2 massive pines snapped under the weight of wet snow, blocking the pass entirely. We were cut off. No signal, no road, and 2 men missing under my yard. By morning, emergency services finally forced their way through with heavy equipment. A fire engine, a rescue truck, paramedics. Seeing those vehicles in Black Creek felt unreal, like the world remembered we existed for a minute. They pumped the well out again. Dark water gushed into the drainage ditch, steaming faintly in the cold air. One of the rescuers descended with full gear, helmet, oxygen, harness. We stood in silence while the pump roared. 10 minutes. 20. Then his voice echoed upward. "There's a lateral opening," he said. "Collapsed wall. Looks natural." My stomach dropped. "And?" Frank shouted. A pause. Then, "No sign of movement." They didn't attempt to enter the side tunnel that day. Gas levels were unstable. The rescuer's monitor was reading high carbon dioxide near the bottom. "Bad air pocket," he explained calmly when he climbed back up. "Heavy gas settles. Man goes down, takes a breath, passes out." That sounded clean, logical, acceptable. But it didn't explain the sound, or the rope moving, or the water rising like something was reclaiming space. They promised to return in spring with proper cave equipment. For now, they sealed the well with a temporary cover and told us to stay away. Mrs. Whitaker watched the entire process without speaking. As the trucks prepared to leave, she finally murmured, just loud enough for me to hear, "It doesn't like being looked at." I didn't respond. I didn't want folklore. I wanted my neighbor back. But that night, as the storm finally died down and the red snow lay thick across the valley, I stood at my window, and I could have sworn I heard something from the direction of the well. Not splashing, not wind. Breathing. Slow. Patient. From beneath the frozen ground. Spring came late to Black Creek. When it finally did, it didn't arrive clean. The snow melted into long streaks of rust-colored runoff that cut through yards and along fence lines. The red dust from the cement plant had fused with the ice all winter, and now it bled into the soil like something infected. By April, the fields looked bruised. By May, the grass had pushed through anyway. Life always does, even when something underneath hasn't settled. The rescue team came back the 3rd week of May. Clear skies,
60 degrees. Birds loud in the trees like nothing bad had ever happened. It felt wrong to stand around the well in sunlight. Wrong that it didn't look ominous anymore. Fresh green weeds ringed the base. The timber lining had dried to its natural brown. If you didn't know what had happened, you'd think it was just another rural water source. But I knew, and so did the others who showed up. Frank stood beside me with his arms crossed. Mrs. Whitaker sat on a folding chair farther back, quiet as ever. The rescue crew arrived with proper cave gear this time. Air tanks, gas monitors, ropes rated for vertical descent. They pumped the water out again. It drained slower than before, thick and dark, but it went. When the level dropped low enough, 2 rescuers descended together. We waited. The valley felt too open in daylight. Every sound carried, boots on gravel, birds in branches, the faint hum of insects in the grass. After maybe 15 minutes, one rescuer's voice crackled over the radio. "We've located remains." A murmur moved through the small crowd. "2 individuals," he continued, "partially intact, preserved by low oxygen." My throat tightened. That was Ben. That was Steve. They were careful bringing them up, slow, respectful, covered. Even after months underground, the cold and lack of airflow had kept them from decomposing the way you'd expect. I recognized Ben by his jacket. Same camouflage pattern he'd worn that day. Same boots. I couldn't look long. Then they found more. Bones. Older. Darker. Mixed into the collapsed section near the side tunnel. "Multiple skeletal remains," the rescuer reported. "Unknown age. Could be decades." Mrs. Whitaker closed her eyes when she heard that. Frank muttered, "Jesus." The rescuers worked methodically for hours. By late afternoon, they had brought up enough to fill 2 body bags and several evidence crates. When the team leader approached us, he didn't look dramatic. He looked tired. "Likely explanation is carbon dioxide accumulation," he said. "When groundwater drops, gas from the cave system settles in the lower chamber. It's heavier than oxygen. You go down there, you breathe it in, you lose consciousness within seconds." He paused. "And if the tunnel connects to a subterranean water flow, it can shift bodies deeper into the system before levels rise again." Clean, logical, scientific. That's what people needed. It explained Ben. It explained Steve. It even explained the older bones, maybe miners from early settlement days, maybe accidents never recorded properly. Everything had an answer. Except for one thing. "Did you hear anything?" I asked quietly. The team leader blinked. "Hear what?" "Down there." He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "Just water movement," he said, "and airflow through the tunnel. Caves can create odd acoustics." Odd acoustics. That's what we were calling it now. They sealed the well permanently that evening. Concrete cap, steel reinforcement, warning signage. No more climbing down. No more looking inside. Black Creek went back to routine within a week. People need routine more than truth. The red snow didn't return that winter. The cement plant claimed improved filtration. The valley looked normal again. But sometimes at night, when the ground temperature shifted and frost crept across the yard, I would wake to a sound. Not loud, not violent. A low, drawn-out inhale, like air being pulled through a narrow space far below. I told myself it was settling soil, or wind beneath the boards, or memory playing tricks. Then one night in late November, I stepped outside. Clear sky, hard frost, stars bright enough to cut your eyes. And I noticed something I hadn't before. The grass over the sealed well wasn't growing.
Everywhere else, even in thin patches, it had come back. But over that circle of ground? Nothing. No weeds, no shoots. Just a faint, dull discoloration in the soil, as if something underneath was still active. I crouched and pressed my palm against the earth. It was warmer than the surrounding ground, not by much, but enough. I froze. Then slowly, carefully, I leaned closer. And I heard it again. Not gas, not echo. Breathing, slow, patient. And this time, closer to the surface. I kept my hand on the ground longer than I should have. The soil wasn't hot. It wasn't even warm in any dramatic way, but compared to the frozen crust around it, the patch above the sealed well felt alive, like something beneath it was holding heat, breathing it out slowly. I told myself it was trapped groundwater, or decaying organic matter, or geothermal pockets.
I had enough half-knowledge to build excuses, but excuses don't explain rhythm. And there was rhythm, a slow expansion under my palm, then stillness, then another. I stood up too fast and stepped back. The frost around the circle glittered under starlight. The rest of the yard was silver white. Only that patch remained dark. The next morning I called the county office. Not 911, not emergency, just the environmental line. I mentioned soil temperature differences, possible underground gas pockets, structural concerns with the sealed well. They told me they'd log it. They didn't send anyone. Black Creek isn't high priority unless something is visibly on fire. Frank didn't laugh when I told him. He didn't dismiss it either. He just stared at the ground for a long time, then said, "Ground shifts, always has." But he didn't step onto the patch. I noticed that. Mrs. Whitaker didn't need to be told. She already knew. "You should stop touching it," she said when she passed by that afternoon. "I'm not touching anything," I replied. "You were," she said simply. That night, the temperature dropped fast. Hard freeze, no wind, clear sky. I slept poorly, and sometime around 2 a.m. I woke up. Not from a dream, from vibration. Low, subtle, like a truck idling far away. Except there was no road traffic at that hour. The sound wasn't outside my house. It was under it. I sat up in bed and held my breath. It stopped, then started again. A drawn inhale, followed by a longer exhale. The walls creaked softly, as if adjusting to pressure. I got up, put on boots, walked outside. The frost was thick enough to crunch under my steps. The air burned cold in my lungs. I stopped 10 feet from the well's sealed cap, and I saw it. The soil over the circle was no longer flat. It had risen slightly, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. A gentle dome where there had been none before. And as I watched, it sank, just a fraction, then swelled again. Like lungs. I don't remember deciding to grab the shovel. It was just suddenly in my hands, metal edge biting into frost-hardened dirt. I told myself I was checking for trapped gas expansion, pressure buildup. If the seal wasn't holding properly, it could cause structural damage later. That's what I told myself. I dug carefully along the outer edge of the concrete cap. The soil there was normal, cold, compact. But as I worked inward toward the center, the earth grew softer, warmer, and wetter. Not muddy, not waterlogged, just pliable, as if it had recently been disturbed. I stopped digging when the vibration returned, stronger this time, clear enough that the shovel blade trembled in my grip. I backed up slowly, and then it happened. The frost across the dome cracked. Not loudly, not violently, just a thin spiderweb fracture spreading outward from the center. The ground dipped inward, an inch, maybe two, and from the hairline split in the soil, a thin stream of vapor escaped. Not steam, not visible breath, something darker, thicker. It rolled low across the surface instead of rising. Carbon dioxide behaves like that. Heavy gas. It sinks. That's what the rescue team said. That's what logic says. But gas doesn't pulse. Gas doesn't inhale. The vapor thickened, and the dome rose higher beneath it. Something was displacing soil from below. Something large enough to press against reinforced concrete. I stumbled backward and dropped the shovel. The earth split wider. A dull crack sounded from underneath, concrete under strain. The dome lifted again, and this time, the steel cap shifted. Just slightly, enough for me to see that it wasn't soil breathing. It was something pushing up against it, from below. The steel cap didn't explode upward. It didn't launch into the air like in a movie. It shifted, a dull, grinding slide against packed soil, just enough to tell me something underneath had applied pressure. Slow, deliberate. The crack in the frost widened. More of that low, heavy vapor rolled out, hugging the ground, spilling over the edge of the yard like it didn't want to rise. Carbon dioxide. That's what my brain kept repeating. CO2 is heavier than oxygen. It settles in low spaces. It displaces breathable air. Perfectly natural. Perfectly explainable. But explainable doesn't mean harmless. The steel groaned again. Another inch. I didn't wait for a third. I ran. By the time I reached Frank's house, my lungs burned, not from distance, but from the way the air had felt in my yard. Thick. Wrong. Frank opened the door before I knocked twice. He took one look at my face and didn't ask for details. We ran back together. The vapor had spread beyond the circle now, pooling in the low areas of the yard. It moved like fog, but wrong. Too slow, too intentional. Frank stopped 10 feet short of the well. "Jesus," he whispered. The steel cap had tilted at an angle. Not broken, not shattered, but lifted on one side like something underneath had wedged itself up against it. The ground pulsed again. Up, down. A muffled, hollow sound carried through the soil, not a roar, not a growl. A drawn-out exhale. Frank stepped back instinctively. "We call it in," he said. I didn't argue. By mid-morning, half the town was watching from a safe distance. No one stood close anymore. Mrs. Whitaker had her chair again, but this time she kept it much farther back. County responders arrived faster than before. Hazmat team this time. Gas detection equipment, portable fans. They tested the air first. High CO2 concentration near ground level. Dangerous, but natural, according to the lead technician. "Probably underground decomposition and trapped gas release," he explained. "Seasonal thaw shifts pressure." He didn't look at the cap while he said it. Didn't look at the way it was rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. They approached cautiously. 2 technicians stepped in with breathing apparatus and began venting the area using industrial fans. The vapor thinned slightly. The dome sank. For a moment, it looked like pressure was equalizing, like this would all collapse into a boring scientific conclusion. Then the ground split. Not a surface crack, a vertical tear through soil and frost right along the edge of the cap. The steel disc jumped. This time, not subtle, a sharp metallic snap. One of the technicians stumbled backward as the cap shifted completely free on one side. Something underneath moved, not rising fully, just adjusting. A mass pressing upward, enough to bow the reinforced concrete from below. The hazmat team retreated immediately. "Back up!" someone shouted. No one argued. The vapor stopped rolling outward. Instead, it began sinking inward again, drawn back toward the opening, like an inhale. The ground sagged slightly, as if something had pulled deeper. Then everything went still. No vibration, no motion, just a tilted steel cap and torn earth. The team leader wiped condensation from his visor. "We're not breaching that," he said flatly. He didn't need to explain why. Unstable structure, unknown cavity size, gas accumulation. Risk assessment alone shut the idea down. They resecured the cap temporarily with additional weight and sealed the perimeter off with caution tape. Official explanation? Underground gas pocket release due to seasonal thaw. Recommended action? Permanent closure and soil reinforcement. The town accepted it. Because what else were they going to do? Dig deeper? That night, the vibration didn't return. Neither did the vapor. The ground over the well lay flat again. Too flat. Like something had resettled itself deliberately. 3 days later, the county brought heavy machinery. They filled the well shaft entirely. Concrete slurry, gravel, soil compacted in layers. They didn't just cap it this time, they erased it. By sunset, the yard looked like nothing had ever been there. Just level earth and tire tracks. Frank stood beside me as the trucks pulled away. "That's that," he said. I nodded, but I wasn't convinced, because as the last engine faded down the road, I felt something subtle beneath my boots. Not vibration, not movement, just presence. Deep, patient, waiting. Not pushing anymore, not testing, just settled. And I understood something I hadn't before. It hadn't been trying to come out. It had been checking whether it still could. For a while, everything went quiet. No vibration, no vapor, no red snow. The yard healed fast, almost unnaturally fast. Grass grew thick over the filled ground by mid-June. Clover spread across it like nothing had ever sunk there. If you didn't know, you'd never guess that a well, and whatever opened beneath it, had ever existed. Black Creek went back to its habits. Cattle out by dawn, pickup trucks rumbling down the dirt road, kids riding bikes too close to drainage ditches. The cement plant still sending its thin haze eastward on certain days, but no more red snowfall. The official story stuck. Carbon dioxide pocket, collapsed limestone chamber, seasonal groundwater shifts. Tragic, but explainable. People need explainable. Explainable lets you sleep. I didn't, because the breathing hadn't stopped. It had only moved. At first it was subtle, a faint heaviness in the air near ground level on certain nights. A slight pressure in my ears when I walked the far edge of my property. Once, standing near the fence line that borders the low field, I felt the soil beneath my boots compress just slightly, like something adjusting its weight below. Not rising, not pushing, just shifting. And it wasn't centered where the well had been anymore. It was farther out, toward the marsh, toward the natural dip in the valley floor where frost lingers longest. I stopped talking about it. There's a point where even reasonable concern turns into reputation damage in a town this small. 2 men dead already. A sealed well. Government response logged and filed. If I kept insisting something was still down there, I'd become the story instead of the witness. In late July, the heat settled in hard. Dry air, cracked soil. The marsh beyond the property line shrank into patches of dark mud. That's when the animals started acting wrong. Frank's cattle refused to graze near the low field. They'd approach it, sniff, then pull back as one group, like something unseen, stood between them and the grass. Dogs avoided that direction completely. Even the geese that wandered everyone's yards wouldn't cross the shallow depression that runs east of my fence. Animals don't care about folklore. They care about air. One evening, just before sunset, I walked out toward the low field alone. The sky was wide and clear, the light golden across the valley. Everything looked peaceful. Too peaceful. The grass thinned as I reached the dip in the terrain. The soil here stayed damp longer than anywhere else. And there it was, a circular patch, not large, maybe 6 feet across, where nothing grew. Not dead grass, not scorched earth, just bare, slightly dark soil. My throat tightened. I crouched slowly, placed my hand against it. Warm, not hot, not geothermal heat, but distinctly warmer than the dry earth surrounding it. The warmth pulsed once, gentle, measured. I froze. Then it happened. The faintest tremor beneath my palm. Not random, not seismic. A contraction, followed by release. Breathing. Deeper now, wider, no longer confined to a well shaft. I pulled my hand back like I touched a live wire. The soil dipped slightly under its own weight, and a thin crack opened along the edge of the circle. No vapor this time, no visible gas, just a dark seam in the ground where there hadn't been one seconds before. And from it, a sound. Not loud enough to carry to town,
but clear enough to reach me. A low inhale, followed by something new. A faint shift that wasn't air. Not movement upward, movement sideways. Something large repositioning itself beneath the valley floor. My chest tightened. This wasn't trapped gas anymore. This wasn't a collapsed limestone pocket. Gas doesn't relocate. Gas dissipates. This was expanding. Not toward the surface, across it. Mapping, testing, finding weak points. The well had been an opening, a narrow place where pressure could equalize. Now it had no outlet, and pressure, when sealed, doesn't disappear. It redistributes. I stood slowly and looked out over Black Creek. Homes scattered across the shallow valley. Barns, fences. The elementary school down the road. All built on soil that suddenly felt thinner than it should. Beneath it, something vast enough to press against reinforced concrete. Something patient enough to wait through seasons. And something intelligent enough to stop pushing when it realized we were watching. The breathing continued, slow, deliberate. Not rising, not yet, just spreading. I didn't tell anyone about the second circle, not at first. Because once you've watched 2 men lowered into the ground and brought back in bags, you learn something. People can survive fear, but they can't survive uncertainty for long. They'll force a shape onto it. Gas pocket, sinkhole, natural causes. So I kept quiet, and I watched. The bare patch in the low field widened by inches each week. Not dramatic enough to draw attention, just enough that if you'd seen it before, you'd know it wasn't imagination. Late August brought drought. The marsh dried almost completely. Cracked mud plates formed across the basin. And in the center of it, right where the lowest ground met the old drainage path,
another patch of dead earth appeared. This one larger, 10 feet across, perfectly round. The grass at its edges leaned inward, as if gravity pulled slightly stronger there. That night, the breathing grew louder. Not enough for the whole town, just enough for me. I stepped outside after midnight and walked to the edge of the marsh. The sky was cloudless, stars sharp, air heavy and still, and the ground was moving. Not visibly at first glance, but if you stared long enough, the cracked mud shifted along the seams, rising, settling, rising again. A slow, synchronized expansion across multiple points now, like lungs no longer contained to a single chest. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't an entity trying to surface. It was infrastructure. Something vast beneath us adjusting to pressure change, mapping voids, finding hollows. The well had been a natural chimney, a vent. When we sealed it, we didn't solve the problem. We sealed the outlet. And pressure underground seeks equilibrium, always. 3 days later, Mrs. Whitaker's porch collapsed. Not dramatically, not swallowed whole. Just a section of soil beneath one support post gave way overnight. The structure tilted 6 inches and cracked. County engineers blamed subsurface erosion from seasonal water movement. They inspected the surrounding ground, declared it stable, left. That same week, 2 cattle on Frank's property were found dead near the low field. No visible trauma, just lying there. Autopsy said oxygen deprivation, heavy gas accumulation near ground level overnight. CO2 pockets, the report stated. Again, logical, explainable. But gas doesn't migrate in perfect circles. Gas doesn't move in coordinated pulses across a valley. I went back to the marsh at dusk the following Sunday. The circle had grown to nearly 15 feet across. The cracked mud at its center had sunk lower than the surrounding ground by several inches now. And as I stood there, the breathing synchronized. Multiple pulses aligning into one deep expansion beneath my boots. For a moment I felt weightless, like the ground wasn't as solid as I'd believed my entire life. I crouched again, slowly, pressed my palm against the warm earth. It responded instantly. The soil dipped inward, deeper than before, and this time, the sound that rose wasn't just air. It was layered, a low vibration, and beneath it, a hollow resonance, like wind moving through a vast cavern system, not small, not local, not contained. I swallowed hard. "We sealed the wrong thing," I whispered to no one. The pulse deepened. The ground sagged further, then a sharp crack. The center of the circle dropped 2 inches in one sudden shift, not collapsing, recalibrating. And in that moment I understood. It wasn't coming up. It was hollowing outward, creating space, redistributing load. The valley wasn't a surface resting on solid earth. It was a thin crust over something much older, something that breathed because it could, something that had been venting through that well for decades, maybe centuries, and we had capped it with concrete like that would matter. I drove to the county office the next morning, laid everything out: soil temperature anomalies, livestock deaths, structural shifts. They listened politely, wrote notes, promised geological surveys. I saw it in their faces. Sinkhole risk assessment, groundwater destabilization, natural phenomena. They would measure, test, reinforce, maybe evacuate a few structures if readings came back high enough, but they would never frame it the way I felt it. Because how do you file paperwork for breathing earth? The survey team arrived 2 weeks later.
ground-penetrating radar, seismic testing equipment. They mapped beneath the valley floor. What they found made them quiet. The hollow system wasn't a small limestone pocket. It was vast, a web of interconnected cavities stretching far beyond Black Creek. Natural cave network, they said, previously undocumented, large enough in places to hold entire buildings, unstable in others, and shifting, always shifting.
Over time, the lead geologist explained, subsurface cavities can expand as groundwater erodes limestone. If pressure builds and vents are sealed, stress redistributes. He didn't say breathing, but that's what the data showed. Periodic expansions, measured contractions, across multiple points, slow, patient. They began discussions of partial relocation, reinforcement zones, monitoring stations. Black Creek wouldn't disappear overnight, but it would change. Because you can't live comfortably atop something that moves like lungs beneath your feet. I still walk to the marsh sometimes at dusk. The circle remains. It doesn't grow rapidly anymore, it stabilizes, pulses faintly, like something at rest, but not asleep. The red snow hasn't returned. The cement plant still runs. Life continues above. But I understand something now I didn't before. The earth isn't passive. It isn't inert beneath us. In some places, it breathes. Not because it's alive in the way we are, but because it must regulate. Pressure, gas, void. We weren't cursed. We weren't hunted. We were standing on a lung and mistook it for stone. And when we sealed its mouth, it simply found another way to inhale. Black Creek still looks peaceful. Fog still settles in the hollows each morning. Cows still chew by the fences. But if you stand very still at night and press your palm to the ground, you can feel it. Slow, deep, patient, breathing beneath you.